Do political ructions in the ANC affect governance and service delivery? Well, one political analyst believes that the country is now being held to ransom by the ANC and cannot forge ahead while its political elites are engaged in factional battles. Political analyst and economist Daniel Silke joins us now. Very good afternoon to you, Daniel. Thank you so much for your time. So what exactly can the country do to ensure that the ruling party isn't affecting things that citizens need?
Well, thank you for having me on your program. The position is extremely difficult in South Africa currently, given the status of governance within the country when combined with these ructions within the ANC. The different factions with the ANC play themselves out in the broader bureaucracy, in the broader state-owned enterprise sector as well. When you have for many years linked the party, the ANC, to the state through the deployment that the ANC has put in place, you run the danger, therefore, that the internal ructions in the governing party simply replicate themselves across the board in other forms of governance within South Africa. And we've seen that happening in aspects of the judiciary. We've seen it happening at Eskom. And it really is the conflation of party and state that is the key problem for South Africa at the moment, alongside, of course, many others. So in the short term, unfortunately, we will be held to ransom until such a time as the ANC itself can find its winning formula. In other words, which of the factions is going to come out on top. This kind of infighting really debilitates delivery and it debilitates policy making as well. If the ANC can't agree on who's in charge, if they can't agree on the policy directives to take, it's very difficult to implement. And unfortunately for South Africans, there really are very limited choices. The choices ultimately are to send the governing party a message when it comes to voting at election time. That's the one option. And the second option is simply for South Africans to tell the ANC directly that this kind of infighting simply debilitates us at a time when we need economic rescue the most.
So I hear you talking about elections and how things perhaps need to be done at the local government elections and maybe the national elections. But what needs to happen right now in April for us to make sure that we change the situation? Because if you're predicting that we're being held to ransom and that essentially the citizen, the person that is at the very bottom of the food chain is going to be affected by this, what can they do?
Well, you're right. The citizen has been affected. In fact, South Africans are poorer as a result of ANC infighting. And ultimately, South Africans are very vocal. We're very vocal on all sorts of issues pertaining to governance, policy issues, social welfare within the country. There's every good reason why we should be as vocal and why we should pressure. And it's not just for ordinary South Africans to pressure government, it's also for organized business, the private sector, to pressurize government as well. And I would certainly argue, and I can be quite critical of the fact, that we have largely allowed this malaise to infect us without adequate citizen objections to what we've seen. So I think whilst we're very happy to protest on all sorts of peripheral issues in South Africa, we really need to make our voice heard on the issue of this ANC incapacitation to govern the country. And that can only be done through citizen action across the board.
Daniel, is the solution perhaps other parties? Of course, there is the DA, there is the EFF. Can we perhaps, put our faith in the opposition parties?
Well, I certainly think that, in what I would call a mature democracy, opposition parties would gain votes on the basis of poor governance, on the basis of a governing party being in disarray. This is the chance for opposition really to gain support. Unfortunately, I think what we've seen in South Africa is we've seen the fragmentation of opposition, or the balkanization of opposition, as I call it. We've seen the rise of smaller political parties, special interest political parties, and the larger parties, particularly the DA, has shed support over the course of the last 18 months or so. And this affords the governing party, the ANC, the continued chance to remain relatively powerful, to not fear a contestation of power when it comes to an election, and therefore effectively gives almost a blank check to the ANC to continue in its current ways. So really, I think what we do need from the opposition point of view is less bickering, less backstabbing as well within opposition parties, and possibly, and the opposition parties won't like this, some sort of alliance for change in South Africa, where the opposition is not balkanized or fragmented, because that doesn't help the creation of a competitive democracy at all.
Just before I let you go, Daniel, the former head of state once said the ANC will rule until Jesus comes back. Do you see that happening?
No, I think no party will rule in perpetuity. I think all political parties across the world face a rise and a fall. And I think the ANC itself is looking at a very difficult time now to keep its various constituent elements together. I think there is a distinct danger now that the ANC itself will fragment. But the problem is, for South Africans, you need to reduce the amount of time that the ANC undergoes this kind of fragmentation, because it is certainly disturbing and debilitating and simply creates a halt when it comes to policy making and service delivery.